I always find it odd and perverse that there are still sort of pro-communist people in the world
Yeah,
after the examples of the 20th century, if
I
nothing
agree
else.
totally with you. I
It's
couldn't agree with you more.
it's perverse to me. But I think I don't know because I'm not a psychologist, but my sort of armchair amateur's view would be that I suppose it's just easier. It's difficult to think for yourself. It takes a bit of time and a bit of perspective. It's easier just to say to yourself that someone's already got to the final perfect answer,
Yes.
and it was, let's say, Marx and Engels. They've
Yeah.
already done all the thinking.
Yes.
That's already been done for us. So just
Exactly.
whatever they said, whatever they wrote, doesn't have to be Marx or Engels. Could be, could be anyone. Could be Evola. It doesn't have to be left wing even. But someone's already done that for me. All I
Yes.
need to do is follow their precepts to the letter,
Yeah.
and that's it. Regardless if that's sort of against common sense, regardless if it's against my own interests. Um, I just think it's lazy isn't really the right word, but it's just easier to do that. I think.
Yes.
I think. Um,
Do you think that there
it's
could be?
scary to think for yourself and have contradictions in your own mind and all that sort of thing.
It is definitely time consuming, but
Right.
I wonder whether there is an issue of diffidence. There are some people who are really, really, really scared of having a voice, and they're really afraid of other people who are very bombastic about theirs. And I think this could have been the case in people, for instance, like Marx. He was he seemed so dead certain about what he thought. And I wonder whether that is something that made people think that, well, I don't feel this way. He does. Maybe he's special.
Right, yeah, absolutely. The thing that springs to mind when you've said that is I'm thinking of the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah.
One of the things I was watching a documentary recently, and they were talking about Martin Luther and some of the early Lutherans and how absolutely certain they were. Very, very,
Yes.
very dogmatic, absolutely 100% certain about their view of God and Christ and
Yes.
things. Um, to the point where, to the modern mind, it almost seems a bit mad. But yeah, with people, if you're not 100% confident in your own worldview and your own opinions, then someone like that can very, very easily just bowl you over. Bombastic is a great word. You can
Yes.
very, very easily just, defer your own thoughts and feelings.
Exactly.
They're so sure about themselves, about their view. They must be correct, at least on some level. They're certainly more correct than me and all my inner contradictions.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think a lot of people, unfortunately, a lot of people in the world are susceptible to that. It's like classic Jedi mind tricks.
Yes.
They work on people. If you're just told in no uncertain terms that this is the correct view, then for a lot of people they will just accept it. It's unfortunate, really, but there it
I'm.
is.
It's very unfortunate, and I'm trying to understand a bit why it takes place. And I think that it is important to approach people who think this way and try to have a conversation with them. That is why I think free speech is very important to maintain. And it seems to me that it's important not to approach them in the way that ideologues do, in the way that, for instance, if you disagree with us, you are a bad person.
Mm.
This is what I sense every time I read a Marxist text, that I sense this idea that if you disagree with what I'm writing, you're a bad person.
You're on the wrong side of history, yeah.
Yes, and I think that it is not important to. It is important not to be this way. And I think one of the ways I'm trying to, I think, explains ideological thinking is that people have the need to somehow find their place in the world and somehow connect the dots. And it seems to me that ideologies are easy ways in which this can happen. But the price of ideology is truth and judgment.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So
I'd just like to say something on
of
that
course,
quickly. I think it's a deep down in lots, not everyone in the world, but in most people, I think, most intelligent thinking people, to understand, just
yes,
simply that, just to understand what's going on and have a framework in your mind that makes some kind of sense. And
yes,
yes, ideologies are great for that.
yeah,
That's why it's interesting you talked about the Socratic principle right at the beginning, because I'm quite a big fan of Socrates
yes,
and the way Socrates thought about the world. And he, in all sorts of ways, is the opposite of that. He would say things like, he would just constantly question everything, including, especially, essentially, ideologies. Why do you think that? Why have you come to that conclusion? Is that correct, though?
Yes.
You know, that's what got him in trouble, really. To be aware of how little you know, to be aware of how sort of fragile and potentially possibly wrong the ideologies and frameworks are in your own mind, that there's a very, very definite limit to the knowledge you've got rolling around inside your head. Be aware of that.
Yes.
Don't be dogmatic.
Exactly.
I think that's very, very powerful.
It is. And Socrates is basically aware of his own fallibility in a way that ideologues are not.
Right.
Because, and it is not strictly coincidental that this way of thinking is a bad form of rationalism, because we have people who just say, I cognize social universals, this is the way history is going, and I don't need to basically pay attention to facts. Mm-hmm. If facts are contrary to the theory, so worse for the facts.
Yeah,
I think that's...
People in the Austrian school or Hegel, lots of philosophers say things like that.
Yes.
Don't worry about the facts. Yes. We've figured it out ideologically.
Yes.
So don't worry about facts anymore.
It wasn't a ripe historical moment.
Right.
Yeah. So, and this is the ideological aspect of the positive tradition, that we have this large metaphysical construct that involves the distinction between the true self, with the rational self, and, on the other hand, the lower and empirical self, that basically distorts common sense. But fortunately, I think there is another tradition, and it's the Republican tradition, that conceives of freedom as non-domination. Now, we will speak a bit more about this, but it's important to say how this came about. So, the Cold War was an intensely ideological period, and there was this proneness to think that, it's us versus them, West versus East. West is all about negative liberty. East is all about positive liberty, which basically is tyranny. That was the way that it was presented. But
quite often the West was called the free world.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. America is the free world.
Yes, and we have this emphasis on free markets and civil liberties. So there were some historians who, like John Pocock and Quentin Skinner, who revitalized what is called the Republican tradition. And they said that Berlin's distinction between two kinds of freedom isn't accurate, or at least it does not exhaust all kinds of freedom. And they also said that Benjamin Constant's understanding of the distinction between the liberty of the moderns and the liberty of the ancients was unsophisticated. So this tradition conceives of freedom as non-domination. And it is important to understand that it is linked to both the negative and the positive tradition, but its supporters think that it is a bit different. So the main idea is non-domination. And non-domination is not the same thing as non-interference. Non-domination is supposed to be the enjoyment of a sphere of activities within which one is not arbitrarily interfered with. So let us unpack this slowly. The Republicans draw inspiration from ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and particularly from the writings of historians like Tacitus. They're interested in the idea of arbitrary rule. And they say that being dominated is to be in a relationship that is master and slave-like, in a master and slave relationship. Mm-hmm. And they say that if it can be the case that a master is benevolent. In that case, though, we are not free. So if we are slaves of a benevolent master, we do enjoy a sphere of activities that are free from interference, but all of that is subject to the arbitrary will or whim of the master.
He might take away that non-interference at any moment.
Exactly.
Right.
And they think that in order to respect citizens and respect persons as free persons, there have to be institutions that safeguard liberty as non-domination, which means that we shouldn't live in a society of masters and slaves. How do you think about this concept of non-domination? Because it's an interesting concept And just like any other concept, it is very susceptible to distortion. We will talk about this in a minute, but how does it strike you when you hear about it,
Well, straight away, I'm a big fan of Tacitus. He's my favourite ancient historian, and he does talk about the loss of liberty and the nature of freedom quite a lot,
Yes.
without really drilling down to it in a sort of a modern philosophical sense of what he means. But so just to say a few words about Tacitus, he lived through the age of the Emperor Domitian.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that's where we actually get the word dominate and domination from, but he lived through the age of Domitian, who was famously a tyrant. And just very quickly to say, the ancient world used the word tyrant and tyranny quite differently to we do. It's purely negative in our world. In the ancient world, it didn't necessarily mean that. It just meant an autocrat. He might be benevolent. Anyway, Domitian certainly wasn't benevolent. He brought in, there was all sorts of political killings, all sorts of political repression, and something like an informer state. Everyone was supposed to inform on each other. If there's any sort of wrong think going on, you suspected your neighbours, or certainly of saying anything sort of subversive or dangerous in any way. So Tacitus lived through that and wrote about it afterwards, a bit afterwards, probably in the age of Hadrian. And he says, and he also writes about some emperors in the generations before Domitian, emperors like Tiberius, Caligula, Nero, arguably even worse tyrants. And he talks about the loss of freedom, the Roman citizens' loss of freedom. There's a famous line when it's actually talking about people that the Romans had conquered, and when the Romans brought them what seemed like freedoms, things like a good economy and a marketplace and nice clothes and wine and nice houses and things. He said because they didn't know any better, they called it civilization when it was in fact part of their slavery. So yeah, you might have a master who is actually really effectively nice, gives you loads of nice things, makes your standard of living higher, doesn't really force anything upon you, and yet he remains your master, absolutely.
Yes.
And he's at liberty to take that, playing around with words now, but he can take that away from you at any moment. He's got that liberty, not you. So are you truly free then? It's a very interesting concept.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.